I'm not sure what I did to inspire this invitation, but I appreciate it nonetheless. At any rate, what I'd like to do to talk to you today about is, well, you can see the title here. It's called Take Me to the River, Everything I Know I Learned. I was going to say from music, but we'll say through music. I think that's more appropriate. So I'm in mechanical engineering, but this isn't by no means a technical talk, but more of a maybe a step through at least my past, and hopefully there'll be some meaning you can take away from it as well. So I come from a little place in northwest Alabama called the Shoals. It consists of 4 little cities: Florence, Sheffield, Tuscumbia, and Muscle Shoals. The landmark sites, not too many, but the ones you see here, Wilson Dam is on the left. It's the only neoclassical dam in the Tennessee River system. Incorporates both Greek and Roman architecture in what, at least in the 1920s, was a modern structure. The other major landmark is O'Neill Bridge, shown on the right. For those civil engineers in the audience, that's a cantilevered Warren through truss and a Warren deck truss. And both of these structures span the Tennessee River right in the northwest corner of Alabama. The music, well, along with the bridge and the dam, the major claim to fame of the Shoals area is its music. Music's played a vital role to the earliest of civilizations that settled on the banks of the Tennessee River. And this influence, as we'll at least attempt to show, has paved the way for many of the pioneers of modern blues, R&B, and rock and roll. At its peak, the Shoals served as one of the 3 major recording hubs, along with Memphis and Motown, for soul and R&B. And so you ask, or you might ask, well, what's the connection between the bridges and the music? Well, it's the river. There we go. Historically, the Shoals, before there were any cities there, referred to a 30-mile stretch of the Tennessee River, shown on the left there, again in northwest Alabama. Prior to erection of hydroelectric dams, this stretch of the Tennessee was replete with Class 3 and above rapids that rendered it largely unnavigable. However, the abundance of mussels and shellfish along the shoals, the riverside there, attracted Native Americans from the prehistoric age to the modern tribes, primarily occupied in the later 1700s, 1800s by Cherokee and Chickasaw tribes. Native Americans of the Yuchi tribe, a lesser-known tribe that thrived along these banks, called this portion of the Tennessee River the Singing River because it made a melodious sound like a woman singing as the water passed over the shoals in the shallow riverbed. The river sang to the people and inspired a strong tradition in song, music, and dance. Most of the Native Americans were forced out of this area as a result of the Indian Removal Act of the 1830s, but they left the songs and their musical legacy in their homeland by the riverbanks, and that legacy, in part, has served as the catalyst for the rich musical tradition that continues to inspire people from this area to this day. Though the sons of the Singing River are many, it's the 3 fathers that are probably the most significant. W.C. Handy, pictured on the left, is known as the father of the blues. He was born in a small cabin in Florence, Alabama. Started in Alabama, but took his music from Bama through Memphis and ended up in New York City. While not the first to play, perform, or record blues music, he is credited as giving it its current form and brought the music into a real national focus. Sam Phillips, known as the father of rock and roll, was also from the Shoals. While you may not know Sam's name, his Sun Records was responsible for the emergence of icons like Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Elvis Presley. And then finally, there's Rick Hall, shown here sitting with legendary Otis Redding. While Rick wasn't born in this part of North Alabama, and only North Alabamians make that distinction, his pioneering studio production was the catalyst for many a star's pilgrimage to record in the Shoals, the likes of which include Aretha Franklin, Etta James, the Rolling Stones, the Osmonds, Elton John, to name a few. I've got a couple of stories I think that highlight the musical scene in the shoals at its peak, which was really an otherwise chaotic period in the state of Alabama among many. The first involves Fame Studios, which looks like this, probably in the best of times. In 1968 Alabama, probably looked more like this. In 1968, legendary R&B artist Wilson Pickett had just flown into town to record a series of tracks with the Swampers, the second house band of the Fame Studio Group. As it happened, a hotshot guitarist by the name of Dwayne Allman was also working at the studio at the time. Prior to recording, the Fame staff headed to lunch in town, concerned by the reception that a sharp-dressed soul singer and a long-haired blonde hippie might receive, either by the police when seen in the same car together or by the restaurant staff and its patrons. Both Wilson and Dwayne decided to stay back at the studio to work out arrangements. Dwayne convinced a very reluctant Wilson Pickett to record the hit Beatles song, Hey Jude. Once the band returned and recording staff returned, they put down the track on the first take, and the result peaked at, I believe, number 13 on the R&B charts. The lessons here, they're twofold. Number one, sometimes the best ideas can come from the hardships and inequities one faces. And a number of the musicians who came here certainly faced those. And then number two, you can make a hot Southern soul version of any song imaginable if you can do it with Hey Jude. The next one is probably one of my personal favorites among many. This one centers on the Staple Singers, originally a gospel group that got their start in the churches of the south side of Chicago. The Staples began crossing over into R&B and Southern soul, really beginning in the 60s through their affiliation with the legendary Memphis recording label Stax. In '72, Staples headed to Muscle Shoals Sound Studios and recorded I'll Take You There, a reggae-inspired number that spent 4 weeks at number one on the R&B and singles charts, and I believe more recently was used in a Chevrolet ad campaign, probably 15, 20 years ago. Seemed recent, but maybe it's not. The interesting part of this story involves not the song itself, but the aftermath. After hearing I'll Take You There, Paul Simon called Stax producer Al Bell, shown here on the left, and told him he wanted the same black Jamaican musicians that backed up the Staples for his next album. Al told him, I can get you those musicians, but they are mighty pale. Paul Simon arrived in the Shoals to find a studio with a leaky roof and a staff largely composed of roughneck white boys, which you see here. Despite the rough conditions of both the setup and the staff, they ended up recording some important Paul Simon hits, including Kodachrome, Loves Me Like a Rock, and other hits off the There Goes Ryman Simon album, many of which required only 2 or 3 takes, and this happened over maybe a 3 or 4 day period. As with the Hey Jude story, I think there are 2 important lessons here as well. Number one, it's cliche, but don't judge a book by its cover. It's the contents and delivery, I think, that make the masterpiece. And number 2, white guys, or at least the five rednecks pictured here, can even play reggae music. After parting Northwest Alabama, I found my way to Nashville, Tennessee, home of country music, and spent really the next 15 years or so immersed in the music-dominated culture of that area of Middle Tennessee. In Nashville, venues like the Ryman Auditorium on the left, Grand Ole Opry, the stage of which is here on the right, draw the biggest crowds and really the most famous of musicians. Unfortunately, or maybe perhaps fortunately, such venues can feel a bit stuffy, especially for Gen Xers such as me, more accustomed to vibrant atmospheres of punk rock and mosh pits and things like that. You know, while the Ryman and Opry are certainly the staples of the Nashville scene, it's the windowless, dark, smoke-filled honky-tonks located in what used to be the seedy areas of town that are the real venues for Nashville music. For myself and for many others, the opportunities offered by a place like the Station Inn or Robert's Western World, where you can have a bologna sandwich, a drink, and buy some boots, all while taking in what they call traditional country music, are much more enticing. The opportunities to see the next big thing before anyone or you has ever heard of them, or the never will be's who work at the local record store but just happen to pick pretty good, and then share a drink and conversation with them afterward is what makes Nashville and many other places like it the place that they are. It's said by some that since about 1970, Nashville is the last place to go to find real country music. In some senses, they're right. This may be true, I think, especially for the high-profile institutions like the Opry, but the traditional American music scene is still alive and well. You just have to know where to look for it. Continuing with kind of my Nashville years, J.J. Kell, pictured on the left here, he wasn't born in Nashville, but his influence on the city, its sound, and the Nashville way of life is hard to deny. John came to Nashville from Tulsa to make it big in country music. Like many budding talents there, the industry roughed him up and sent him home packing before he had a chance to make his impact. He returned to Tulsa, proceeded to develop his own laid-back style of country blues, topped with a little bit of rock and roll, and then returned to perfect it in Nashville, along with the help of some of the finest Nashville musicians that you've often heard but never have heard of. I think the lyrics to his song "Roll On" really capture the essence of Nashville and the folks that continue to call it home. And I'll maybe just read through these. If the sun don't shine this evening and the rain is pouring down, don't grieve just because it's cloudy out. Luckily, it's not today. Come on down to the corner. We're having a party there. You can dance naked. Nobody really cares. If your mind is heavy laden and your thoughts keep getting you down, don't you worry, honey, we're all right here in town. There ain't nothing to it, ain't nothing to it, ain't nothing to it at all, just a little bit of rhythm and blues and rock and roll. So roll on, just keep rolling on. And if you haven't been to Nashville, that's about as quintessential Nashville as I've seen, very representative of the city. And then closing, or soon to be closing here, much like the Fugitives, who were a group of poets and influential teachers of literature that assembled at Vanderbilt in the 1920s. Townes Van Zandt, shown here, was part of a comparable group of really singers and songwriters operating under the umbrella of the legendary cowboy Jack Clement's production umbrella in the 70s. Townes was the contemporary master of melancholy, the kind whose music makes you feel the pain and suffering without having to feel the pain and suffering. He has some more uplifting moments as well, and the excerpts from "To Live's to Fly" I think capture Townes at his best, and I'll go through those as well. Days up and down they come, like rain on a conga drum. Forget most, remember some, don't turn none away. Everything is not enough, and nothing is too much to bear. Where you've been is good and gone, all you keep's the getting there. To live's to fly, all low and high. So shake the dust off your wings and the sleep out of your eyes. Looking forward and coming full circle. For me, really, it all comes back to the river, the singing river that the Native Americans who lived on its banks held in such high regard. In the 1830s, a young Yuchi tribes member, a young girl and her sister, Taylane and Wanale, were relocated from northwest Alabama to the Indian Territory of Oklahoma as part of the Indian Removal Act of the Jackson-led federal government. When Taylane arrived in Oklahoma, she found that the rivers and streams there did not sing to her. After years of longing, she left Oklahoma on a 5-year journey to return home to the banks of the Tennessee River. Taylane returned because there were no other rivers that sang to her in Oklahoma. She couldn't live without her soul. Today, the stone wall sits along the banks of the singing river to commemorate Taylane's journey home. The wall, neither straight nor of uniform length, height, or width, is symbolic of Taylane's journey, and I think more broadly, symbolic of life's journey, which is never straight or narrow. In closing, I urge you to find your own singing river, wherever and whatever it happens to be, and leave your own stones upon its banks. As the Yuchi elders say, all things shall pass, only the stones will remain. Thank you.